Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.13 mid-lane tier list. So, drop content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes towards the mid lane this patch. Not really that impactful. We saw some quality of life changes to Pantheon. We saw a nerf down towards Brand, and we saw a buff up towards Orianna and Lissandra. Pass up, not a huge amount else, but let's cover the tier list. So to begin with, the D tier is going to have two new additional champions. We have Smolder, who I'm re-adding as he does see some level of play rate within the mid lane. He's still very unpopular. I wouldn't really recommend playing him here. He definitely performs a bit better in the top lane and the bot lane. In general, we do want to keep him slightly on the weak side. I believe that this champion can be frustrating to play against if he's strong. Obviously, on release he was very strong, and it created some very obnoxious kind of game states. Maybe over time they change their stance on it and then they buff him back up and he becomes a viable mid laner, but for the moment I would recommend against playing him. Lucian, on the other hand, has mostly seen spikes in play in solo queue because of his competitive reappearance. This is mostly because there's a lot of AP junglers in the competitive meta at the moment, which is why they're like digging deep into the AD pool. It's why the likes of Ezreal has kind of made a reappearance within the mid lane. Tristana, Yone, obviously like your mainstays. Corki also performs very well in competitive at the moment. Lucian is quite a deep dive. I really dislike it in competitive, and it's not a good solo queue pick. I'd recommend avoiding this champion for the most part. He is also going to be within my D tier. Ezreal is also within my D tier. He still underperforms in solo queue. I added him last patch as he did see a pretty big spike because of competitive. Yeah, I'd still recommend against him. There are better AD options than these two, which should get you better results. Once again, this is obviously targeted towards low and mid elo. If you guys would like to see a high elo tier list, write in the comment section, because it's definitely something I've seen a bit more traction around, which people are kind of wanting to see. But if it garners enough audience, then I could definitely look into making that alongside my low and mid elo tier lists. Alongside these three picks, we have Corki and Azir. So Corki, Azir has obviously been competitively nerfed pretty heavily at this point. He doesn't really see a huge amount of play in competitive, and that kind of suggests that he is going to be very weak in solo queue. Obviously the AD mid meta is definitely punishing for him. Losing a lot of lane sustain can be quite detrimental towards being able to scale up and kind of find those team fights which you are looking for. In Corki's case, he is very strong competitive. He is clearly doing really well there. For solo queue, just not finding good results. I'd recommend avoiding this champion until they kind of shift some of his power around. Maybe drop some of it from his early game, make him a bit more mid, maybe late game skewed. We'll have to see, but for the moment he's definitely underperforming solo queue. I'd recommend avoiding this champion unless you're willing to put a lot of games into it and really get a feel for the champion and its kill thresholds. Moving on to the C tier, we have Kai'Sa being added on as well. So Kai'Sa obviously can go both AP and AD in the mid lane. We primarily see AP just in general across the board. Like in the bot lane, you'll see the static Ginsu's variants. In the mid lane, you tend to just see primarily artillery with like your Manamune, your Luden's companion, and then yeah, you're just playing for W, harass, and poke. It's not bad. It's definitely better than some of the other options, but and like as an artillery threat, it can be successful if played in the right team comps. But for the most part, there are better, easier to execute artillery options, which I'd recommend over her. The likes of Xerath tends to perform quite well at the moment. Lux also can be considered an artillery. But yeah, for the most part, Kai'Sa, not really something I'd recommend at the moment. She's going to be within the C tier. Zed is also here. Zed obviously kept weak intentionally because of his frustration. He's also he's a very hard to execute champion well. He also gains a spot in the C tier for those primary reasons, honestly. Katarina does have some better build variants. Obviously, we've seen some like AD, AP hybrids. There are kind of things being experimented around. You've even seen stuff like Zeke's being built on this champion. When the kit is kind of used correctly and the itemization is like correct within the game, this champion can be quite decently successful in solo queue. There are people who are very proficient with this champion, and if you are proficient with a pick and you put a lot of time into it already, then it's definitely something you can find success on. But for the most part, I would never really recommend this champion for a mid and low elo player unless they are really enjoy the play style and definitely willing to like put the time in to learn it. Otherwise, avoid Katarina. She's in the C tier. Kassadin and Kiana are going to be my other two champions which retain their spots in the C tier. Kassadin has been underperforming for a while. We've actually seen him at the most recent Esports World Cup game where Humanoid played it as like an insta-lock to APA Ziggs, and it went horribly. I don't like this champion in its current state. It should definitely be better for how much early game you really sacrifice on this pick. Obviously, there are ways around that. You can kind of like loosen up harass lanes by running things like Fleet, D-Shield, but for the most part, he underperforms at the moment. I would recommend avoiding Kassadin. In Kiana's case, she's like the most elite skewed mid laner in the game. Not really something I'd ever really recommend for a mid and low elo player, but for like high elo, she's great. She's probably like an S tier pick. It's definitely something which, if you put the time in, you can become very successful on this champion. Other picks which are being dropped down here, so I'm adding Hui to the C tier. This is probably a controversial one, but Hui has actually been underperforming for a bit now in the mid lane. Ever since he received his recent nerfs, he's definitely fallen a bit. Obviously, he was someone who very much abused Blackfire Torch. It's very strong on him, but yeah, he tends to be a bit harder to pilot. 9 abilities can definitely be punishing if you're not very well versed on the pick. Rise, I'm going to drop down as well. Rise just isn't very popular. I think Rise is to a degree underrated. This champion's not as bad as many people perceive, but there is definitely power to maybe not his simplicity, but like his combos, and if you can execute him correctly, you can definitely have a lot of control on this champion. But without buffs, it's just really not that easy to recommend the pick, so I'm going to put him down into the C tier. And Zoe is also going to get dropped down. Zoe's pretty strong in China. That seems to be where a lot of her like audience and power lies. In the West, like, she just isn't finding success for the most part. I'll be interested to see if they end up doing some work, maybe like shifting some of her power around, but at the moment she is also going to be added down to the C tier. Moving up from the C tier, we have LeBlanc. So LeBlanc has been performing a bit better for a while now. Definitely, she's like the third most popular in the mid laner in the game now, which is great to see. Obviously, she was very unpopular for a while. She was very much underperforming. New skin came out, and the buffs came through, and yeah, she's finding a decent amount more success on the current patch, and she's deserving of a spot in the B tier. On top of this, I'm going to move Yasuo up. But the problem with Yasuo has probably been a B tier champion for a while, but I could never really bring myself to move him up because loads of people were just trolling on the rune setup. Like, we were seeing so many Conqueror and so many PTAs when really you should just be defaulting on Fleet like every game. It gives you like the safety in lane, it gives you a level of chase. The other two keystones just don't synergize particularly well with Yasuo these days. On top of this, Absorb Life looks to be better than Triumph at the moment. And then for like the third minor rune in that tree, you have options in like Cut Down and Last Stand, which I'd recommend over Coup de Grace. Coup de Grace just doesn't seem that performant in general at the moment. I believe the buffs to Cut Down have definitely helped it be a more successful rune on a lot of picks. Definitely something I would recommend considering on Yasuo. The other champion which is going to be moved up, which got buffed this patch, is Orianna. Orianna's doing a bit better now. Not quite as successful as obviously last season, where she was like second most popular mid laner in the game, even first at some points, and really just being a powerhouse of a mid laner. She did get nerfed down, and the itemization just wasn't as great going into this season. She's been buffed, and it's definitely helped. Obviously, making CSing a bit easier early on to the game, making her trades with her auto passive also a bit nicer. She's now a solid B tier option. We're kind of past the days of like the Syndra Orianna like meta last season, and yeah, we've kind of moved away from that, but she's definitely finding a bit more success at the moment. Akali also with my B tier. She's a low B tier option. Definitely lost a lot of power with the E nerfs which came through last, not this patch but the patch before. Not something I'd really recommend as much anymore, but she was definitely too strong, did need nerfs, probably a bit over nerfed at this point, but kind of sits towards the bottom of the B tier. If you play the champion, you can still find success. Vladimir is going to be towards the top of the B tier. Vladimir is actually doing a bit better. There was a bug with him where it wasn't actually converting some level of health ratio, I believe, into his W. So now that's been fixed. He's definitely gained a bit of power from that. He's getting very close to the A tier. He is relatively similar power level in both top and mid at the moment. If you enjoy the champion and you build him correctly, going with like sort of Rabadons first, you can definitely find a decent amount of success. He's a solid high B tier option. Talon, with the buffs and the Schroeder's Grudge change, I was really hoping this pick would find a bit more success, but he's just not quite there yet. He definitely tends to rely a bit on the elite skewed. Yeah, he tends to be a bit more elite skewed. Obviously, the roaming, the map pressure, the very lethal all-ins early on into the game can all kind of attribute to this. He's a high B tier option, but just not quite there yet. Ziggs, solid artillery pick, but also not as reliable as the likes of Zareth, which is still what I'd recommend as the go-to artillery option. But you can definitely find success on this pick. Obviously, APA is a great person to watch for this champion, as he is one of the best Ziggs players in the world. Jace, obviously another one of the AD pool at the moment, which is definitely being kind of leaned into because of the AP junglers. He tends to operate a bit better in mid lane than top lane. Obviously, top lane tends to be a bit more like you're running your Conquerors, Phase Rushes. Mid lane, you tend to see a bit more like Electrocute, and then obviously Phase Rush tends to still be an option here. Electrocute did get changed and is a bit better early on into the game, doesn't scale quite as well. Dark Harvest is better for scaling now. But Jace is a solid B2 option. If you put the games in, as always, Jace tends to be pretty successful. He is a pretty he's a very difficult champion to learn well. Syndra, also going to be on my beta. She's in a solid spot at the moment. She does what she needs to do. She's balanced, if anything. Not too strong, not too weak. Obviously, her burst damage is still very good. Her build and her itemization is in a solid spot. You can find success on Syndra if you put the games in. She's a solid B-tier option, like towards the high end, alongside like your Vladimirs and your Talons. Malphite, Malphite finds a lot more success if you build him correctly and you're going like your tankier variations when you need them. AP Malphite doesn't really find as much success in the mid lane, but it's definitely something you can opt into if you do need that AP. He's a solid B tier option. Yone and Twisted Fate are the other two champions here. Yone is obviously doing a bit better. He got buffed. They also made sure that people are running Alacrity on the champion again. Obviously, people were running the CDR one for a bit, which really was tanking his win rate quite a bit. He's a solid B tier option. Twisted Fate obviously got nerfed pretty heavily in 14.12 and is still feeding those nerfs. He is in the B tier now. We've kind of moved on from the Twisted Fate being like one of the strongest mid laners and top laners. He's now pretty underperformant in both. Moving on from that, we are moving Lissandra up to the A tier. So Lissandra definitely finding a lot more success on the with the buff she did receive, increasing her CC capability, increasing her burst potential with the Q AP ratio going up. She now solidifies her as a good A tier pick. Nasus is also being added to the A tier. So Nasus, I keep adding and removing Nasus. He's not the most popular mid laner, but he definitely has success. And like, I do really think that people should be playing this champion a lot more within the mid lane. Kind of give more accurate representation of where he is. If you want to play Nasus mid, I'd recommend checking out Desperate Nasus. He plays both Nasus and Kayle mid. He is very good at these champions and definitely someone you can really learn from. And yeah, Nasus, very solid A tier mid laner. Quinn, obviously, this is like your speedy Quinn build with your symbiotic souls, your not Swifties, I believe Yomu's might be the itemization of choice. There are options there. Oh no, it's Profane Hydra. Profane Hydra, because you want the wave clear, it tends to allow accessibility onto side lanes as well. She's in a pretty good spot at the moment in the mid lane. Both actually mid lane and top lane, Quinn are doing quite well at the moment. Yeah, solid A tier option. It's primarily like your movement speed Quinn and your roaming to sides. You're being oppressive. Have high burst potential. You can proc Profane Hydra when you're Eing in to guarantee that damage. Solid pick. Fizz primarily used as like an ASO counter pick, but he's still in a solid spot at the moment. Okay, well, the problem with Fizz is he did get nerfed pretty heavily. He doesn't feel as rewarding to play, but he's definitely not weak by any means. He is definitely a solid A tier option. You have you're primarily gonna like your Luden's Companion though. You want your burst, and then yeah, like your Lich Bane, stuff like that will perform quite well on him. He's a solid A tier pick. Actually dropping down from the A tier, there were two picks which I needed to include, and that was Talia and Ahri. So in Ahri's case, she got nerfed in 14.11, I believe, and the nerfs kind of dropped her down a bit. The AD mids being a bit better now has definitely also kind of lent into that, and she drops down from the A tier to the B tier. In Talia's case, she received primarily jungle nerfs for this patch, but she was already losing power in the mid lane, and this kind of just pushes her down from the A tier to B tier. It makes it harder to poach camps. It makes her Baron and her Drake taking a bit weaker if you do go and assist on these objectives, and she drops from the A tier down to the B tier. Continuing with the A tier, we have Aurelia. Aurelia, obviously, if you pilot the pick well, can be very successful. Not something I'd really recommend playing if you don't put the games in. Obviously, like, this champion does require a lot of games to play proficiently. You have to play very on the edge, making use of like your lifesteal, your aggressive playstyle in early laning phase. If you sacrifice too much in laning phase, you'll really struggle to pilot this pick mid and late game. But she's a very solid A tier pick, especially if you do put the games in. Morgana, finding a bit more success in the mid lane these days. Obviously, Blackfire Torch is a very nice item for her. She has loads of options though. She has, like, obviously still Zhonya's, Liandry, Violet can be a nice option. If you want a bit more AP, you can go down like Rabadon's, but it's not particularly necessary. You tend to go down the application route. And then you can run things like Crippling, and they're all pretty nice items for her. She's a very solid A tier option. Obviously, her ease to play, she does require setup traditionally to make sure you can consistently land Qs, and if you're playing into certain lane matchups, it can be quite oppressive and hard for the champion. But definitely as like a mid-game pick with like the damage, the tools she has, she can be very solid, a very good A tier pick. I actually already had Nasus. I've just realised. Well, I've re-added him. Nice. Okay. Tristana is also going to be within my A tier. So, Tristana, obviously, like, the go-to AD competitive pick at the moment. She's not that successful in solo queue compared to like her pro presence, but she's definitely something you can opt into if you do need that AD. If you're looking for AD mid laners, I would recommend Garen and Neferi for low elo, especially. Mid elo, obviously you have some other options, and like your Tristanas. Akshan tends to be a bit high elo skewed, but even the likes of Pantheon are pretty nice here. Tristana, very good in competitive and elite play, not so successful in mid, and yeah, she kind of sits in the A tier for that reason. But definitely, if you put the games in, she can be very successful. She can very much take over games. If you pair her with an AP jungler, she can be quite oppressive in her just lane, her ability to shove lane, roam to sides, roam to invade, stuff like that can be all very nice. And the champion's in a good spot. Viego is actually going to be removed. No one really plays Viego mid anymore. It was decent. It was a solid A tier pick, but yeah, it's kind of gone at this point. Nico, also very unpopular in her current state. Bao is unpopular as she was pre the update to like make it so she can transform into different things. She's still a solid A tier option. Obviously, you are very early game skewed. You tend to be that way because of your oppressive nature of Q, Scorch, if you're running like Airy, Electrocute, all these are very early game orientated tools. Her ultimate isn't quite as powerful if you don't get the AP, like if you don't have like huge chance of AP. Obviously, if you pick up like a Dark Suit, you have Medjay stacks, I know it can be quite oppressive within games. But yeah, she tends to be a bit more early game skewed at the moment. Pantheon received a 10 damage W quality of life. It dropped its win rate by 0.02% in the mid lane. It clearly wasn't going to do anything. It's just a nice change. It makes last hitting a bit easier. Vex is also going to be my A tier. Primarily just a counter pick option to high mobility picks. Yona, Relia, Yasuo. She's very good into all of them. If you're not playing into all of them, her power does tend to be a bit weaker. She's a solid A tier option though. Silas also primarily used as a counter pick option. If you see like a Malphite, he is a great lock-in. Other champions with like good ultimates can also be, this pick can also be quite good into. Tends to be a bit more early games aggressive skewed at the moment, though. You run like your Electrocute, you tend to be very much reliant on your EWQ burst damage. You don't really see so many first strike Q maxes as you once did. And yeah, it tends to be a bit more, bit stronger early onto the game. Not so strong later on, but a bit more reliant on his burst potential. Not really seeing Conqueror Silas that much anymore. Echo and Diana, once again, can go together. Both these champions are relatively similar, very reliant on their early game aggression. In Echo's case, you're running like your Scorch, Halo Blade setup, you're starting E, you're just going in for very heavy trades, and you're kind of relying on just being able to like abuse the enemy laner. In Diana's case, just harassing with Qs early on into the game. I would like to see some of Diana's power shifted, honestly, to her ultimate. Her ultimate's in a pretty bad spot at the moment. It just doesn't really do that much damage. Like, you've probably noticed this if you play against Diana quite a bit, or you play Diana, but her ultimate is a pretty lackluster ability, honestly, compared to what it used to be, at least. But the champion's still in a very solid spot. Very early game skewed. Both these picks, great A tier options. Akshan, still very elite skewed. This pick doesn't really tend to be as successful in low and mid elo, but he still isn't bad as an option. You can definitely find success on this pick. Obviously, you tend to run very aggressive like setups, kind of use your brute force early game to translate into leads, and then be a very strong mid-game marksman assassin, and he's a solid A tier option. Victor is also in a pretty good spot at the moment. Obviously, your Blackfire Torch tends to be pretty successful on this pick. He's definitely kind of refound his purpose in the game now. Victor for a while was kind of seen as being just a very bad mid laner, but yeah, he's definitely doing a bit more successful at the moment. Still can struggle if you're not getting early takedowns. Getting your stacks tends to be pretty hard if you're not getting them. But if you do, then yeah, he can snowball in the game. He can be very oppressive to play against. He has very long-range tools, and it can be, yeah, very hard to play against this pick. ASO, not... Okay, so I see, like, two different sides to ASO often. Like, ASO is terrible. This champion can't lane against anything. Or ASO is just in a, like, ASO's, like, oppressive. He's very hard to play against. This champion, if he ever gets rolling, is too good. And honestly, he kind of sits, like, in amongst that. Like, if you follow Nemesis or you follow Chovy and, like, watch how they play the champion, like, your Q taps, making sure you're applying, like, your Arcane Comments, your Scorch procs, making sure you're, like, stacking your mana flow early on into the game. Obviously, they are nerfing that at some point. It might be 14.14, so the playstyle might change. We'll have to see. But he's in a pretty good spot at the moment. Definitely if you learn the pick and you play it well, making sure you're not really being, being demolished in laning phase. Like, if you can actually play this pick in laning phase correctly, then you can definitely find leads outside of lane and then be an incredibly good mid to late game team fighter. There is just a huge amount of power to be kind of had there. Obviously, some lanes will force you out. Like, you're not going to be able to win like a Fizz lane. That lane is very hard to pilot, and oftentimes it's just something I'd recommend banning if you're playing ASO a lot. But the pick is in a pretty good spot at the moment. I would really recommend him as an A tier option. Anivia sits towards the high end of the A tier. Obviously, once again, she's still a very unpopular pick, and I can't really move her much like further up because of that reason. But she's not in a bad spot by any means. You have loads of like itemization choices. Obviously, I believe the Rower tends to be pretty popular. But yeah, there are choices there. She's a solid A tier option. Alongside her, we have Vel'Koz. Vel'Koz, obviously, solid artillery mage. Ever since he received buffs, he's been in a pretty good spot. Blackfire Torch can be an option here. I know some people like your Horizon Focuses, your Leandries if you're going burn variants, Rabadons if you want a bit more burst potential. There's loads of, once again, itemization choices at the moment, and he's a very good A tier option. And then Swain. Swain is very unpopular. He's receiving big changes at some point soon. Obviously, the overall changes that he received just never really found the direction they were going. He's not very popular in mid-top APC and support at the moment, and because of his usual success in mid lane, you can't really see him having that much success in the support role, and it just creates this pretty bad like environment for Swain at the moment. And yeah, he kind of sits within the A tier, but you can definitely find success on this pick. Like, by no means is he bad. He's a great AP frontline option. Blackfire Torch, Leandry, Rylai's on your Malignant, so loads of good item options for him. He's a solid A tier pick. Moving on to the S tier, so we have Garen. Not that popular in the mid lane, but very strong here. Garen just generalistically at the moment is in a very good spot. He's both good in top and in the mid lane. And yeah, you can find a lot of success on this pick. People aren't going to be expecting that much good. Like, you don't see Garen mid. That is just not something which is particularly popular. And you can have a lot of power by kind of just by the enemy not really understanding how to play the matchup that well. Garen has a lot of burst potential. He's good, relatively good team fighting. If you're ahead of the curve, if you're behind, it can be quite punishing to play. Decent, not great itemization choices. You tend to be pretty hard bound to like your Stride, your Phantom, your Deadman's, Sterix, and then you have options in like Fawn, IE if you're looking for a bit more burst potential. But he's in a very solid spot, a good S tier option. Heimerdinger, still my underrated pick of this split at the moment. He is in an incredible spot. I wouldn't even be surprised if they end up nerfing him at some point. People are surprised. He's probably free LPE if you learn the pick well. There's loads of good itemization for him. Obviously, Blackfire Torch is just another good item in his arsenal. He's a great S tier option. Annie, her simplicity, the option in being able to just play like a burst mage or having Tibbers as a raid boss with like your Malignance, your Leandra, your Rilo variants. She's also in a very good spot, a relatively easy to play champion as well. Cassiopeia, a great answer to like relatively short range comps where you can have a lot of power in kiting. Into artillery, she's definitely going to struggle a bit more. She's still a very solid S tier option. Zareth is my go-to artillery mage. I think this champion's in a great spot at the moment. He's even got his new skin, which you can buy. It's very nice. But yeah, and I'm also, he is in a very good spot. He's very oppressive to play against if he's ever ahead. The ultimate change, where he now gets so many shots in his ultimate, has definitely helped be able to be a bit more consistent. He's a great S tier option. Neferi, probably the go-to, I mean, it is the go-to AD assassin for mid and low at the moment. The simplicity of picking this champion combined with the buff she received in 14.12, she's in a very successful spot at the moment. If you learn the pick well, she can definitely get you all the way to Masters. Brand is actually going to be dropped down from my S plus tier to the S tier. The simplicity of the pick combined with his obnoxious wave clear has been tagged down a bit. Obviously, the passive restore on the Ablaze burn is no longer as much as it was, combined with his E going down by 20 damage later on into the game. These are all pretty small changes, but they can definitely add up. You will feel the fact that he's lost a bit of damage, and you won't be able to spam out as many spells. He's now dropped from the S plus to the S tier. He's still a very good option though, especially mid and low elo. Malzahar, now that he's found his itemization in Blackfire Torch on 14.10, he's in a good spot. Like, Malzahar is definitely a champion I would recommend. If you do enjoy the pick, obviously he is considered very boring to play, but so are so many champions, and if you find what you enjoy and you can play it well, you could oftentimes find a lot of success in that. Malzahar in a great spot at the moment, has good lockdown, his wave clear is very obnoxious to play against, and yeah, he's very successful, a good S tier option. And then we have Lux and Veigar. Honestly, Veigar's probably my lowest S tier option at the moment. He doesn't find as much success as a lot of the other S tier options, but his scaling combined with some of the itemization you can opt into, combined with the ease of playing the pick, if you find the right matchups, when he is definitely an S tier pick, but obviously if you're playing him into Katarina, you would definitely feel it, and you can be punished in that matchup. In Lux's case, it's very hard to play against this champion. Her wave clear is very obnoxious. She has a lot of range, which is pretty hard to dodge. Like, both a lot of her skill shots are pretty large in size, and if you ever get the setup to play around this pick, the burst potential is obviously very obnoxious. If she's ever ahead of the curve, you really feel it. If she does fall behind, then she doesn't really do a huge amount of damage. Obviously, there is some level of burst potential there, but just not as egregious, and oftentimes not as just being one shot if you ever get hit by a snare. And then Galio is my S plus option. Galio is an incredible spot at the moment. You have the options in like his burst build, the not Leandri, but a Lichbane variant, where you're primarily just leaning into like your burst items. Still a lot of power in that build, but primarily you're just playing like your Hollow Radiance, and you're just playing as like this frontline mage option. Very hard to move, have great map control, really hard to push out of lane, and yeah, Galio is probably the best pick in the mid lane at the moment. You have to ban Neferi though. Neferi will be played primarily as a counter pick option to Galio, and yeah, the rest of the picks aren't as punishing. Obviously, he's going to be weakened to the AD matchups where you can't really get as much value out of the magic shield, and yeah, make sure you ban the Fury, and you should find success on this pick. Those are my thoughts for the mid and low elo mid lane tier list. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.